challenger brought a bill with respect to annexation. And the idea there was that if there's an individual that has a parcel or a lot that's abutting a city, the city can't just take that. He wanted to make annexations you can't force annexations, but you have to get the consent of the individual, whether they want to be annexed into that city. So the push generally is to give property owners more more power over where their property lies. If it's, the people buy outside of the city grows to them, and all of a sudden there's a forced annexation. So we're working to eliminate that, so that if you want to be part of the city and have those services, great. If you don't, you have the city has to show some written consent before you can be annexed. And this is just the same issue, just slightly different. And I just wanted to comment about that. Go ahead.
And Don, real quickly, last year the legislature passed a law that, and this was probably a start now that'll help this bill, that a lot of farmland between the Oregon border and Boise is valuable, and there were some forced annexations, and it's already passed that if you're a 5-acre farm, with 5 acres or more, it's illegal to force them to be annexed into a municipal entity at this point. So that's a really good precedence for what Representative Zollinger is trying to do.
Well, on that note, there were some people coming around with a bill that were telling us that there are large areas just outside of Boise, residential neighborhoods that have been forced into annexation into the city of Boise, and their property taxes went up 33%. And they are not getting city services. They are not getting city water, sewer, or streets being taken care of in the winter. So they're a little more than furious, and this forced annexation is something that is somewhat common down in the southern part of the state, and luckily up here, the city, to my knowledge, the city of Coeur d'Alene still does not agree with forced annexations. That's why if you ever see a city map, you'll see that there are holes in our city map that are not part of the city. They're just areas that are not part of the city. I believe that Post Falls does not force annexations. Probably not Dalton.
I'd like to just add a few more words on that. House Majority Leader Boyle proposed a bill last year which did pass the House and Senate that, as Mr. Addis indicated, would prevent forced annexation of dedicated agricultural land. This year, actually last year, I introduced a bill that got absorbed into a secondary bill that didn't pass, but it protects forest land from being forcibly annexed into a city. And as Mary Souza indicated, we're pretty fortunate up here in the north. Rathdrum and Post Falls do not do forced annexations. They always look for consent from the citizens, and usually it's the citizens that ask to be annexed. Now, that is not the case in the rest of the state, which is why we have those preemptive bills passed. My bill is still on the third reading calendar. It was supposed to be heard yesterday. I have no doubt that it passed the House, and then it goes over to the Senate, and we're looking for support from new senators to help pass that as well. Thank you.
So if Kootenai County were to hold an advisory vote on the proposed, I guess the city has approved the URD for the hospital district, would that vote have any impact on how you feel or how it might be viewed in Boise with the other legislators?
John, are you mixing the URD, the Urban Renewal Advisory vote, with the forced annexation?
No, this is just about, because we had a good discussion on URDs, and there's a proposal that the county have an advisory vote on how the citizens of the entire county felt about the URD for the hospital area.
I already sent, early on in this process, I sent an email to each of the county commissioners asking them to to approve the advisory vote, and told them that
And I also think they should conduct an advisory vote.
I'm happy to support an advisory vote. As far as the specific part of your question, would that influence legislators outside of our area? It's hard to predict, but I kind of doubt it.
Okay, I figured we were talking about the other legislators, because I think what you said is very important, that it works in other places, and I appreciate the information. Just so you all know, we had a number of questions regarding right to life, and we will get to them, but we took quite a bit of time last month talking about that, and meanwhile we had other questions stacking up, so I'm going to ask some more of those questions, and then we will be dedicating time to the numerous questions that I've got regarding the pro-life bills or the abolition of abortion, so just so you know. All right, House Bill 440 passed the House this week on a party line vote of 55-15 and moved to the Senate. This bill is authored by Heather Scott, Ward Connolly, who is here in the audience. With us today, Janice Montgomery and Beverly Hanson have been major proponents of this bill. Ward succeeded in advocating for this language in 8 other states over the past 20 years. This bill advocates for the equal treatment of people in the state regardless of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. Question for the senators here, what is your position on this bill, and how will you vote when it comes before you in the Senate?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to start because I'm the co-sponsor of this bill in the Senate, and so I think that would answer how I'm going to vote.
That's an easy one.
But just let me explain it just a little bit, and then I will let the other 2 senators answer the question. But this is a piece of legislation that says that you cannot discriminate based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin, which I think is the way America was meant to be, first of all. But what this does is this is in the, and I'm looking this up, the public employment, public education, and public contracting section of our code. So any place that, any public school, public university, public employer, or if you have a contract, it would ban you from discriminating based on those qualities. And in essence, what it does is it eliminates affirmative action in government hiring. And I think as Mr. Connerly mentioned to me just before the meeting started, and I knew he'd sponsored this, and we talked on the phone, but this was the first time I've gotten to meet him in person. It's time in America for this to go away, and I agree. So I'm proud to be the co-sponsor of this legislation.
If I may. But those of you applauding really need to listen to watch the hearing that we went through about this, because you just aren't being compassionate enough. You just really have no feelings about the minorities in our culture, in our state. I turn to Representative Linda. Anyway, can you imagine ever sitting and listening to the most twisted cultural effects about how we're not being compassionate to the transgender community, to the LGBTQ community? There was a term that was used that became really bad, queer. We don't use that anymore. Well, wait, they're using it now, standing there at the lectern saying, as a queer woman, and it's like, you've got to be kidding me. We can't keep up with the language changes fast enough. Maybe it's because I'm too old. I don't know. When the newspaper says that the majority of the people getting up there testifying against something like this it's all coming out of Boise. And I just cannot express to you how crazy it is that this subculture, this segment of our culture, as legitimate as their own feelings are, they demand that they should be their rights, competing rights all of a sudden, competing rights, their rights should prevail over anyone else's rights to think, to speak, to use language. There was a time when, in America, when each of us was sovereign, and government was to protect that sovereignty against malevolence. But government has become so powerful that now all they can think to do is protect what has become the most bizarre aspect of our culture. And they should be free to live their lifestyles. There's no question in my mind that they should be free. America is free, or it used to be. But when it becomes a part of how I'm to think, how I'm to speak, how I'm to deal with my life, then it gets to be a problem. And this is an exact example of that. When Heather brings this bill, it is just like, well, naturally we don't want to discriminate on behalf of these things. But the government now is discriminating on behalf of these things. Yes. They've got quotas that they have to fulfill, enough women, enough other minorities. We get that. But this is a cultural battle. And I think most of us here recognize that it's a cultural battle. But listening to the testimony, one would think that we have to lose the battle before we should start fighting for it. And that's just not the way we're going to work.
No.
Mr. Carlin, will you stand up again, please? He's been working on this for 8 years, and more than that. Before the meeting, Mr. Carlin handed me this piece of paper describing some of the language, and it reminds me of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Equal rights for people in the state, regardless of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. I think maybe you could stick religion in there. You've got the Civil Rights Act all over again. Yeah. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know, Ward started off doing this very successfully down in the occupied zone, also known as California. That's where he got the ball rolling, and he's continued it. We're successful in Washington State also. So we're glad to have you guys here. All right. Following up on that, I was given a note that the movie about Clarence Thomas, called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words, is playing at Riverstone beginning tomorrow and running Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So you may want to take an opportunity. I have heard that it's an absolutely excellent film, so something for you to think about at Riverstone.
Don?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you want me to answer the former question? As the other senator? Because that was the question. What would the senators want to do?
Please do.
And I absolutely believe that everyone should be treated equally, and there should be a level playing field for everyone. So, pardon me? So I did want to use this as a chance to just tell you about a bill that just passed yesterday out of the Senate, and I want to alert my House member friends to pay attention to it, because it's coming your way. It's not a bill that I supported. I don't think any of us senators supported it, but it has to do with this topic. And it's called Fairness in Employment or something like that. And it wants to take away the right of employers to ask employees if they have a criminal background. That box of have you ever been convicted of a felony on standard application forms would have to be removed. And the person coming out of prison would be able to apply for a job without telling the employer of their background until the employer gives them a conditional offer of employment. And then, legally, the employer could ask. But at that point in time, there's been a lot of time and effort in the employment process. We own a small business, my husband and I, and we have employed people who have a criminal background, but it's been our choice to do that after knowing that up front and interviewing the person and making that decision ourselves. Sometimes it has worked out well for us, sometimes it has not worked out well for us. So it's simply not because we want to deprive them of the ability to work, but it's that we need to know that their entire history up front so that we can make a decision that's best for our business. And I think that if we discriminate, just like the race and color and all the rest of those quotas that were in place for so long, if we discriminate by saying that the government can tell employers what they need to do, I think that's wrong. And the vote in the Senate was 13 noes and 21 yeses.
Wow. 13.
Pardon?
Senate Bill 13.
Senate Bill 13-8. So there you go. Now it's your responsibility.